Did you miss our lecture with Barbara O'Neill live in London on the Wellness Way this summer? You can grab a copy now on my webpage, phillyjlay.com.
Cholesterol is the most crucial fat, really, that we're talking about when it comes to the human body.
Bobby is the Director of Education at CNM and just one of the best naturopaths that I have come across.
Health does begin in the mouth. That's a first important part to say.
Very true.
The oral cavity we're learning more about all the time. And so, yeah, a big interest of mine in practice is definitely inflammatory bowel disease. And I've seen the most amazing results of people coming in. You know, I've had kids come in, 11-year-olds with Crohn's disease who can barely go to school because of the severity of their symptoms, and they need to be by a toilet, hemorrhaging blood, and within a few months they are 80% better, 90% better. So the scope and the power of naturopathy is remarkable. I live and breathe it, and that's why at the college I love my role, because it's a much bigger picture of being able to reach more people. You have to be very, very careful. Do not assume because it's a health food shop that it's going to be healthy.
So we're talking about fat and cholesterol, and I want to touch on seed oils.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very difficult one for people to eliminate. The issue with these oils is that when they are heated predominantly, they become rancid. I mean, this is literally like toxicity in a plastic bucket.
Welcome to The Wellness Way with me, Philly J. Lay, a layperson's guide to your natural health systems, your very own NHS.
Hello, lovely people, and welcome to another episode of The Wellness Way. And I'm not in the studio today. I'm somewhere really special, a college that I absolutely love in the heart of London, CNM, the College of Naturopathic Medicine. And I am with the Director of Education, friend of the show, the wonderful Bobby Qureshi. Now, Bobby is the Director of Education at CNM and just one of the best naturopaths that I have come across, and I am so privileged to have you on the show today. And I feel like I know you because, we've done an interview together. We DM the whole time on Instagram. We've just realised this is the first time we've met. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's very much reciprocated. I feel like I know you very well now, Philly. And yeah, thank you for your very kind words. And it's great to be here on your podcast.
Oh, well, it's fantastic to have you here. And the work that CNM does for natural medicine is unsurpassable. There isn't another college in the world, in my mind, that does what you guys do. Now, Bobby and I did a podcast last year, as I said, so go and check that out if you hadn't. And we covered germ versus terrain theory and the immune system. And Bobby actually gives the most eloquent description of how the immune system works. I mean, it's just amazing. But for anybody that hasn't heard that episode yet, can you just brief us on germ versus terrain? Did you know that 22 billion pairs of shoes every year go into landfill? I find that disgusting, and so does my sponsor Vivo Barefoot, and they're doing something about it. And that's why the lovely people at Vivo have offered my audience an exclusive 20% discount off your first order with the code PJL20. You know how much I love my grounding and how important it is for your health, and because of Vivo, you can stay grounded all the time. Head to their webpage and check out their new grounding shoe, entwined with silver to connect you to the earth, as worn by myself and Barbara O'Neill.
Germ theory is what the conventional medical system is based on. It's based on the idea that a germ, so a microbe, a bacteria or a virus, causes a disease. And that's really the emphasis. It's all about the germ, the microbe. The terrain theory instead looks at the environment in which that germ is residing within, and it looks at the resilience of that environment. You've probably seen perhaps on social media that there's sometimes those graphics go around where there's a picture of a fish tank.
The fish tank, yes.
And it's sort of a question of, do we medicate the fish or do we clean the water? So it really is, in simple terms, looking at how can we build that resilience, that robustness in terms of our resilience to help provide defense against these infectious organisms microorganisms, because of course we know that, our body is made up of trillions and trillions of bacteria in particular. In fact, in terms of microorganisms versus human body cells, we're outnumbered by about 10 to 1.
Yeah.
So those organisms have a huge role to fulfill. And unfortunately, most people just are led to believe that these microbes are all bad, all make us ill, and therefore many people fear them, which of course we have unfortunately seen become more and more of an issue since 2020.
Yeah, I mean, I remember somebody contacting me on Instagram because his wife was pregnant in 2020, and she walked past a tree and touched it by mistake and started getting hysterical that she would have germs from the tree that could cause her to get COVID. I mean, people went into a completely irrational state through the propaganda wheel that the government set up. And it must have been quite a shock for you when you saw this happening. Did you ever have any fear? Did it ever worry you?
Not at all, really. I think obviously I'm in a very fortunate situation that I have the knowledge that I have. And I'm very assured, I'm very confident, I know how to critically evaluate research and look beyond just what we're being told in mainstream media. In fact, I don't watch any news. I purposefully keep very much away from it. So I feel very confident in terms of my knowledge to be able to really make a decision and to be informed about the choices that I make, and for me and for my kids now. I think luckily I'm in a privileged position in that sense, but of course many people aren't, and many people were led because of the fear propaganda that unfortunately we were all exposed to. It definitely has a lot to answer for. I think we need to really educate people that in fact a lack of exposure to these microorganisms correlates with more allergy, more autoimmunity, and in the long run, more infections, because our immune system develops and matures through exposure. If we don't give it the exposure, the end result, unfortunately, is not a pretty one.
No, I know. And I was having this conversation with somebody the other day when they were talking about chicken pox. They said there was a vaccine now for chicken pox, and I'm going, why? I mean, I don't know if there is, actually. I was just going, there can't be, because, when my kids were little, if somebody had chicken pox, you phoned up the whole class and went, oh, little Johnny's got chicken pox, and they're going, oh, over to Johnny's, and you go and you build up your herd immunity. Totally. And that's what people did. I saw a beautiful little clip, actually, on TikTok on measles, and and it was an American TV show in the 50s where they were all kind of getting very excited because they all had measles. And then they had a blackboard up and going, and they're ticking off, we've all had it now. And then Granny comes in covered in measles. And if you don't get something like measles, you are then very susceptible to something like shingles in later life. And so it's really important that we build these robust immune systems that have been just shattered out of us since 2020.
Yeah. And the thing is, through natural exposure to these different infectious organisms, our body builds a very comprehensive and targeted immune response. So, that's the one thing about, naturally being exposed to, let's say, droplets that contain a virus. Obviously, that enters your respiratory system, that moves through the cells lining your airways. There's sort of a staggered approach then in terms of a very simple immune response. Then that gets sent to the more advanced immune system, which then launches a very targeted response against that organism. But of course, if you sort of bypass a lot of this, you don't go through those normal stages, which is something that through the natural exposure to infections that we should be having in our life. We should get sick. It's part and parcel of life. It's part and parcel of how our immune system becomes robust. And unfortunately, again, this fear of these organisms is something that's not really helping us at all.
No. Another thing that didn't help us at all was hand sanitizer.
Yeah.
So I do want to touch briefly on hand sanitizer because I saw so many pictures and had so many people message me because they have family members that were using hand sanitizer and their hands were literally bleeding.
Yeah.
The skin is the largest organ of the body. So why don't you put hand sanitizer on?
I mean, a good way of putting this into a visual here, I've got 2 kids, a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. And if they drop a strawberry on the floor, I'm not immediately going to go, that has to go in the bin, right? It's okay for them to get some exposure. Of course, within reason. If we're in a really horribly dirty area, then maybe not. But it's okay to get some exposure. We don't need to constantly wash and be clean. There is something called the hygiene hypothesis, which is coming back to what I just said. The more cleanly our environment, the more sterile our environment is, the more likely we are to get immune dysregulation, predominantly allergies and autoimmune conditions, which are now increasing at the most unbelievable rate.
Through the roof.
It's incredible. Most patients I now see have an autoimmune condition or will develop one. And I feel like at the moment, it's very repetitive. I feel like I'm almost sort of going back to the same principles, which we're going to talk about on today's podcast, which does relate often to the gut and how that then often becomes a significant factor in the development of autoimmune conditions. But we can often help to reduce our risk of going down that route just by getting adequate exposure through earlier stages of life.
Which is wonderful. My mum always had a 5-second rule. So if you dropped it on the floor...
5-second rule is a good one.
And anything under 5 seconds, you could still eat it.
I like it.
So you mentioned autoimmune disease there, and you mentioned the gut, and that's what we're going to talk about today. The gut is so incredibly important to the whole system of the body.
Yeah.
Hippocrates, all health begins in the gut, and it's taken modern medicine a couple of thousand years to catch up with him. But let's talk about the gut. Where do you want to start?
I think start with the basics. The digestive system is really what we're talking about here. This is this 30-foot long tube that actually really begins at the mouth, finishes at the anus. Health does begin in the mouth. That's a first important part to say.
Very true. Yeah.
The oral cavity we're learning more about all the time, particularly about the oral microbiome, the importance of having different species of bacteria that reside in the mouth. The teeth, think of traditional sort of dental work with mercury fillings. Think of, the sort of typical approaches that might be used in conventional dentistry. Maybe that's not always helping patients.
No, it's quite criminal, actually. I had to have my amalgamate fillings taken out, and they actually shattered one of my teeth while they did it.
Ouch.
And I didn't even need those fillings. I'd never had a filling in my life. I was 16 years old and I moved to college in London. Mum said, you better get a dentist in London. And I came out in tears and phoned her and said, I've had 2 fillings. And I've never had a filling since.
Yeah.
I've never needed one. So you've got to be very, very wary of your dentist to start with.
Yes.
You're absolutely right, though, that that is the beginning. So let's talk toothpaste and let's talk mouthwash.
Absolutely. I mean, we need to be supporting our oral microbiome, not destroying it, which unfortunately is exactly what fluoride will do. And of course, the issue with fluoride is that it is a halogen in terms of the chemical structure of fluoride, which can then go and impact the thyroid gland in particular, because the thyroid relies on iodine predominantly to produce thyroid hormones. And basically fluoride is a very similar molecule. It's within the same chemical group if you go back to the periodic table. So there's an issue there that by having lots of fluoride that's going through your mouth, through that very thin barrier of your oral cavity into the blood, obviously the thyroid is not far either, that it can block those sort of receptor sites in essence. It can be absorbed in replacement of iodine. So that's a problem.
It is a problem. Also, if you look at any toothpaste packet, it says not to give it to children under is it 6 years old?
Yeah.
So if you can't give it to a child because they might swallow it, why is anybody using fluoride toothpaste?
Yeah, it comes back to many questions, unfortunately, that have a much deeper answer, and there are much bigger entities that are at play here, in my professional opinion. Unfortunately, it's like the food industry, it's like the pharmaceutical industry. You know, it all comes back to the same thing, which predominantly is profit and money, and the fact that our conventional medical system is one that is there to ultimately make profit, not get people healthier.
And the same is with mouthwash, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Mouthwash as well. I mean, generally these are highly toxic liquids for your oral cavity. They will not be doing you much good except making your breath smell nice. I mean, that's really the only benefit.
But if your breath doesn't smell nice, then you've got to look at your gut.
Absolutely.
It's not your mouth. You've
Absolutely.
got to look where this comes up from. So this is the beginning, this beautiful mouth. Your anus is the end, and then you've got this vast length in between. So let's talk about what the gut is.
Yes. So then obviously beyond the mouth, and I should add, that, by the way, briefly, that chewing is obviously a very important part of the mouth as well.
Yes.
And adequate chewing. Then obviously we swallow the food that we eat. That goes down the food pipe or the esophagus and into the stomach. The stomach is basically this bowl-like chamber. The stomach is a very, very very important organ in the digestive system that doesn't tend to get the attention that it deserves.
No, it doesn't get talked about much, the stomach, does it?
It doesn't. And often people sort of call the stomach this whole area. They don't realise that there is an individual organ called the stomach. The stomach is important because it is a very thick muscular organ that has this very acidic juice that has a pH of about 2 to 3. So if 7 is neutral, you know, going up to 14 is alkaline, 2 to 3 is very acidic. And everything in the body has a purpose. The body is very, very clever. So obviously we've evolved into these incredible machines where, you know, we have this organ that has a very highly acidic juice to help us to digest food, to help us to kill certain organisms that we don't want, that we've perhaps swallowed, to help us turn calcium and iron into forms that we can then absorb. It actually also, stomach acid helps you to signal to the next part of your digestive tract to get it to start working, basically saying, look, pancreas, look, intestines, food's about to come through.
The body is so clever, isn't it?
It's incredibly clever, but how many people are on drugs called proton pump inhibitors or other antacids that suppress the production of stomach acid? So many people, one of the most commonly prescribed drugs is a drug called omeprazole, which is a PPI. And then these people are often given this medication and end up on this medication often for many years, often decades, and without very, very little follow-up. And this is used for heartburn. And yes, it might help the symptoms, but the long-term implications can often be quite significant because you've then lost a juice that's there to help digest, provide protection against unwanted pathogens, unwanted microbes, to help you absorb iron and calcium. So think of the potential nutritional deficiencies. Think of the digestive issues that might result. You know, by having low stomach acid, you're then more likely to get bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine, which is called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Extremely common. How many people do you know that get bloating accompanied by either constipation or diarrhea? That's SIBO for you in most cases. So it's just important that we really look at the fact that this is all there for a reason and that we should be supporting it, not depleting it.
I think that is the saddest thing with modern medicine, is that all it does, you know, and with people, they just want to cover symptoms and just go, I want to feel better, rather than going, what's going on in my body?
Yeah.
Let's get to the root cause of this. But I think the times are changing, and I think people do now understand the harms that Western medicine has. Because a lot of people think of these, you know, acid blockers, oh, they're nothing, they're not a real drug, it's not medicine, you know. And they, you know, my ex-husband used to pop them like nothing on earth, like sweets. He just thought they were okay, you know, so...
I think there is definitely a shift. I mean, you know, even, you know, I'm in my 30s now, but going back to when even I was a child, you know, it was medication for everything, right? You know, it'd be an antibiotic for any sore throat. It would be painkillers for any sense of pain, any fever. And I think there's a general shift of people that are waking up here that actually this may not be the right way to approach things. And there might be a better way that's more natural, that supports the body's self-healing mechanisms. And, you know, even at CNM, I've been at CNM now for 10 years, and the popularity of our courses has absolutely skyrocketed People are definitely much more interested in trying to find alternative answers, and even in the clinic that I am in myself, the clinic that I run, it's it's definitely the case that more and more patients are coming that probably wouldn't have come previously, that would have just got on and taken the metformin. But now they're going, actually, is there an alternative to taking that medication?
I hate that word because we didn't alter nature.
Absolutely.
It upsets me. It's just like organic, going, this is an organic carrot, and it's just like, no, this is a carrot. That's a chemical carrot. You prove. So, everything's been turned up on its head.
Yeah.
But I want to keep focusing on the stomach, and just so people know how important it is to nurture this little baby.
Definitely. And, there are certain things that away from sort of medications that definitely do negatively impact the stomach as well that we should think about. Stress is a big one, chronic stress. When we are in a sort of fight or flight state, we basically deplete our stomach. We actually deplete our whole digestive system, but that means less stomach acid, less digestive enzymes, less physical contraction, churning up of this food that we swallowed. So stress is definitely something that we should consider here in the bigger picture of what might negatively impact your digestive system. Also, deficiencies in certain nutrients. You need vitamin B6, you need zinc to make your stomach acid. So maybe there's an issue there from a dietary perspective. If your diet is quite ultra processed, maybe there isn't the variety in your diet, maybe you're not sort of ticking those boxes. So that's another one to consider.
And I'm just going to say there, it is very important to have this acid. You do not want to be blocking the acid. The acid is good for you.
Yes, and most people that have reflux or heartburn, they have it not because there's too much stomach acid, but because the sphincter, which is this band of muscle at the bottom of the esophagus, is dysfunctional or faulty. And so that whatever is in the stomach, even if it's a small amount of acid, can then regurgitate. So we actually should be looking at why is there what we call gastroesophageal reflux, rather than let's just suppress acid production. So, for example, that could be because of poor breathing habits. It could be because of an imbalance of the gut microbiome. It could be that there's something else, more obvious going on, basically. But rather than trying to, suppress the production of this very important acid, we should be asking the question why. And there are so many solutions naturally to dealing with heartburn.
And you mentioned breath work there, which is absolutely free.
Yes.
Anybody can do it, and everybody, I believe, should be doing breath work every single day.
Definitely.
What else would you recommend? I'm a big fan of digestive enzymes that you mentioned there, but they cost money. So what else can you just offer people for free?
Yeah, I think deep breathing exercises definitely is a very good one, because if you imagine that my hand here is the diaphragm, which is this domed sort of sheet of muscle, and my hand here represents the esophagus, let's say like so, the esophagus literally goes straight through the diaphragm. So every time you breathe, you are impacting that esophagus and the stomach and that junction, that sphincter I spoke about. So definitely deep breathing is a very good one. Looking at the basic food that you're eating, avoiding any irritant foods, very simple. I always think, I have so many patients come in and I ask them, well, what makes this worse? And they go, oh, it's always bad whenever I eat deep fried fatty food. And I go, well, do you eat deep fried fatty foods? Oh, yeah, sometimes. And I'm thinking, well, why do you eat it if you know it makes it worse? So the first thing to do is just simply remove the things that are trigger foods, whether it is often things like deep fried fatty foods, more ultra processed junk foods, but also even things like tomatoes, peppermint even can actually dilate that sphincter.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so peppermint's good for sort of reducing bloating and gas, but actually in terms of reflux is not always the best thing to take. But in some people it's okay. The other thing that does cost some money, but it's not much, would be to use herbs like slippery elm or marshmallow root. These you want to use as a powder, ideally, although some companies give them as a capsule. And you simply mix it with water and drink it. And that literally soothes the esophagus and the stomach. I love the idea of digestive enzymes. That's very good. I tend to go for what we call digestive bitters. Bitters are basically anything that have a bitter taste. That could be bitter greens, so
Like
rockets,
parsley.
absolutely,
Great one.
parsley. Dandelion leaves are
Yeah.
one of the best. So my go-to for patients is normally rocket and dandelion leaf because they're very bitter. And if you have those at the start of a meal, that signals to your digestive system to get working. So it's a good way of switching everything on. Also, deep breathing at the start of a meal stimulates what we call the vagus nerve, which controls digestion. So those things, just getting into some good habits, 30 seconds of deep breathing, a bit of rocket at the start of your meal.
Perfect.
Can help. You can get formulations with patients. I often do prescribe bitters, which tend to be herbs that you can get as a liquid. The traditional blend is what you may have heard of, are called Swedish bitters. But I tend to find actually that Swedish bitters, without getting into the detail, don't tend to work amazingly for everyone, because on an energetic approach, they are quite on one extreme. So generally what we want to do with the digestive system is not cool it down, but actually warm it up. In Ayurveda and Chinese medicine, we talk about this digestive fire. So that's why things like ginger, which have that warmth, are good for turmeric. They warm up the digestive system. But digestive bitters, just to give you a couple of examples, things like, and there's a herb called barberry bark, which is very good. Even fennel, even the peel of citrus, having like citrus peel. There's so many. Golden seal is another one. Dandelion you could have. So there are many herbs.
And dandelion, the leaves are very bitter.
Yes.
Fantastic in salads. The roots I always use in teas.
Yes.
Is there any part of the dandelion, because it's all edible. It's one of Mother Nature's miracles.
Yeah.
Which is the best part for the stomach, the leaves?
The leaves generally are good for the bitter element. So that's good for digestive juice production. The root is actually very good for bile production. Bile is a bit further on down this tract, and that helps to break down fats. Bile also carries a lot of the waste and the toxins out of the liver via the gallbladder. So the root is very good. With the root, because it's more kind of woody and thick, you generally need to simmer that to break down those constituents. Because if you think about it, the leaves, it'd be very easy to pour boiling water and you can see the water constituency, consistency change. Getting my words mixed up. But the root, to sort of break that down and get the chemicals out of it, the plant chemicals we want, generally simmering it in a saucepan for sort of 10, 15 minutes and then extracting it that way is generally better. But that's also very good for the liver. So the liver and the sort of bile flow, definitely dandelion root is a really good one. Artichoke is also amazing for bile and for the liver.
And you know what? If you plant your artichokes around your apple trees, it's companion growing and it keeps the bugs off the apples.
Amazing.
So they don't need spraying as often, which is just one of those little fun facts.
I love that.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm slightly in my, because as you know, I'm based in Dubai, setting up C&M in Dubai. And I feel like I'm in my Dubai bubble of basically cacti and all the sort of tropical plants. I'm a bit separated now from what an English garden would look like.
Okay, I'm going to ask you this. Our body knows what it wants, when it wants it. Like the nettles come through right at the beginning February because you need the nettles to build the antihistamines and stop, all the allergic reactions. And then you've got the root vegetables in the winter. Now you're working in Dubai. Do they need different things? Can you say to somebody, have a stinging nettle? Because presumably you don't have nettles and dandelions in Dubai.
Exactly.
So their bodies most probably don't need them like our bodies do. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think, in Dubai, the season's either hot or extremely hot. So there's no sort of rain, there's no cold.
There is when they start spraying.
Well, that's true. That's true.
That was a thunderstorm.
Which supposedly was not cloud seeding, but we won't go into that one. But no, absolutely. I think, it's interesting because in every part of the world, what kind of grows around you is very interesting, thinking about the diet and the what that body may need. Of course, it then raises the question of whether these areas really were truly intended to be, lived in and to have big civilizations developed in them. But of course, places like Dubai rely so much on other countries. Also, there's a very interesting farm, a biofarm there called Emirates Biofarm. So we get a lot of our produce from there. But there is always that feeling of, it's not particularly seasonal.
And it's just slightly removed
it's
from
slightly removed
the body.
Exactly. So there's that slight dissociation that I feel a little bit there in that regard, which is much easier. Even in being in the UK the last few days, I went to a really, really lovely biodynamic farm yesterday called Plorhatch Farm down in East Sussex. And it was so nice to sort of see all the, seasonal produce, and, you can look out through the window and watch it all growing. It's nice to see that. Unfortunately, places like Dubai, they're not quite there.
Well, the UK is, but it's fading fast. We're seeing our farmers under attack big time now in the UK. And a lot of this comes back to the corporations, the supermarkets and everything. So it's very, very important, if you want to keep your gut happy, to eat organic, to get out in nature, to forage. I'm a big foraging fan. And just, embrace your seasonal goods. That is really what you need to do. Let's go further down the track.
Yeah.
So we've done the stomach and...
So once we go beyond the stomach, we then go into the small intestine. And the small intestine really is about absorption. So by the time this sort of food that you've swallowed has gone through the stomach, it now really is about sort of how can we liberate these nutrients and then absorb them. So what happens in the small intestine is that we've got the pancreas and the gallbladder, which input their secretions. So the pancreas secretes a whole bunch of enzymes, and it's sort of the last-ditch effort to drag everything out we can. Because if you think about absorption, your body will only absorb these nutrients when they are in their simplest form, or at least they should. Your body should. So for example, if you imagine starch, like what we find in potato, that's made up of hundreds of units of glucose, your body will not absorb it until it's a single glucose molecule. That's the point at which absorption happens. So what the pancreas does is it sort of helps those final 2-3 chain molecules to split up so that you can then absorb them. The bile comes in from the gallbladder to help you absorb fats. And then what happens is, yes, we should be able to absorb those nutrients. This is again where the stomach, the pancreas, and the gallbladder together, those three have a very important role to play in digestion, because the stomach produces acid and enzymes, the pancreas produces enzymes for all of your macronutrients, and then bile comes in and helps you to digest fats. But what impacts all of them will be the same things, like stress. So when you're highly stressed, you basically press the off switch for your stomach, for your pancreas, and for your gallbladder. So the end result is poor digestion, which then equals poor absorption, because you can only absorb when these nutrients are in their simplest form.
And why do, stones, gallbladder stones, why do they build up in the body? Because so many people have gallbladder stones.
Yeah, many reasons why. I think the first thing to think of is what is the gallbladder there to do? The gallbladder's there to store what we call bile and to then excrete it. Where does bile come from? Bile comes from the liver. And the liver basically uses bile as its way of sort of getting rid of anything else it doesn't want, whether it be deactivated hormones, toxins, cholesterol, anything that's in excess. It will sort of shove into bile and then say to the gallbladder, here you go, can you get rid of that for us?
Your mate.
Exactly, it's like your friendly
your
next door neighbour. And so we need to be thinking about, well, what's in that bile? What is it that the body's trying to eliminate? A lot of gallbladder stones, are formed of cholesterol. So you might be thinking, well, what's going on there from a sort of fat metabolism perspective? Are there any issues there in the liver?
You see, I think cholesterol's been bastardised wrongly.
Absolutely.
And, and so I actually think, the brain, 75% cholesterol. You need fat. And so if the body is taking the cholesterol and turning it into these stones, what am I missing here? Why?
So it's definitely not a one size sort of fits all of it's all cholesterol. It's cholesterol with other factors. For example, you might have a patient that's perhaps overweight, perhaps their sugar intake's too high. So metabolically, there's normally something not quite right when it comes to gallstones. You're absolutely right. Cholesterol is the most crucial fat, really, that we're talking about when it comes to the human body. So if it's ever implicated, it's never early on in the process. Even in atherosclerosis, where we get fatty plaques in our arteries, if cholesterol is implicated, it's only at the very end, once all the damage has already been done. You know, in heart disease or arterial disease, cholesterol only deposits when an arterial wall has been damaged, and it actually goes there to help repair. That's what cholesterol's there to do. And unfortunately, in certain contexts, when there's a very unhealthy body and there's lots of sugar and inflammation and et cetera, that cholesterol can then become oxidized because of the environment. And that's then when cholesterol becomes relevant there. So it's not cholesterol's fault. Cholesterol's trying to help. But unfortunately, because it's almost like going, well, there's cholesterol in that plaque, so it's all cholesterol's fault. But what we should be doing is, well, why has cholesterol become oxidized in that area? What's causing the damage? What's driving this? What's promoting it?
Yeah, same as cancer. You know, we all have cancer cells in our body, and when they come together, it's the body trying to pull them all together to go, oh, hang on, something wrong here. Can we just change our lifestyle a little bit?
Yeah.
So we're talking about fat and cholesterol, and I want to touch on seed oils.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very difficult one for people to eliminate, because you go out to most restaurants and unfortunately you're going to be eating food that's been cooked in sunflower oil, rapeseed oil, other unpleasant oils. And
you know, I once went into Whole Foods before Amazon owned it. Don't go into Whole Foods now. But I went in there, and they have the kind of cafe that you can take out the food.
Yeah.
And I was looking at it, and then I just thought for a moment. I said, "What do you cook all of this in? What oil and fat do you cook it in?" I said, "Oh, canola oil." I went, "Are you kidding me?" And they went, "No." And it's just like, how can you stand there and say you're a whole food and cooking canola? I mean, I don't know what they cook in now, but carry on. Tell everybody
Absolutely.
why these seed oils. If you can't even trust whole food, who can you trust?
You have to be very, very careful. Do not assume because it's a health food shop that it's going to be healthy. You know, it's something you have to be really vigilant with. And there's always certain questions that we ask going out to a restaurant, and one of them is, you know, what oil do you cook in if you cook with oil? And there are many restaurants where I'm just shocked because everything else, you know, it's organic, it's gluten-free, it's refined sugar-free, you know, it's this, yet actually what they're cooking in is pretty toxic stuff. The issue with these oils is that when they are heated predominantly, they become rancid. They have lots, if you imagine their fatty acid structure, if you zoom right in, there's lots of kinks in the structure. And when there's a kink in that chain, it's very vulnerable to damage. And that's damage through heat, but that's damage even through light. So if you imagine those plastic bottles of sunflower oil sat there, often right next to an oven, you've got light exposure you've got the plastic, you've got the heat. I mean, this is literally like toxicity in a plastic bucket.
It is. It really is. I mean, I'm just, my mouth is kind of winching at the thought of it because it is so toxic.
Yeah.
Problem is, you know, a lot of people think olive oil is safe to cook with. I don't very often cook with olive oil, certainly not at high temperatures.
Yeah.
But again, the majority of olive oils, I read somewhere it was 90% of olive oils in supermarkets has been bastardized and cut with these cheap seed oils. You know,
you've got to do your research. You know, this is all an investment. I always say that naturopathy is a way of life. It's very much about taking that time to try and really work out what are you putting in your body, what are you exposed to. But you're right, you know, we very carefully select the olive oil that we use. We make sure that it's really good quality, that it's pure extra virgin olive oil, that you know, it's in a glass black bottle, so that it's there's no plastic, there's no light that can really damage it. We store it in a cool place. You know, all those different things you have to do, and it's crucial. A lot of people get their cooking fats, get their cooking oils quite wrong, sadly.
I just use coconut oil, and and organic grass-fed butter,
Yeah.
which I can never have enough of.
Yeah, you're the same as my wife. She's trying to persuade me, but I'm like, no, staying dairy-free, thanks. But yeah, you know, absolutely. Ghee is also very
Yeah.
stable, and like you said, extra virgin olive oil at lower temperatures is also fine because it does have a lot of antioxidants in it. But again, you do have to just make sure you're carefully sourcing it.
And also, it's extremely good for you when it's, you know, organic, cold pressed, the proper stuff,
Yeah.
as a liver cleanse. So
Yes.
to be having it on your salads every day, you know, with the apple cider vinegar, lemon juice, you know, that's my salad dressing is basically a liver cleanse.
Fantastic.
How would you cleanse the liver? What do you think are the best herbs for cleansing the liver? Because the liver's obviously doing all this work around the body, and the stomach's kind of pumping away here, and we've got the pancreas and everything else, and we haven't really spoken. I know that the liver isn't the gut.
But it's part of the digestive system.
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, you know, the liver has over 500 functions to fulfill. Hence why it's the second biggest organ in the body. It's so important that we get it right. But it you know, this is an organ that has to detoxify all of these toxins that we're exposed to in our modern life. So it's doing a lot of work. So I always think with the liver, start from the basics, minimize your exposure. Try and minimize your exposure to plastic, to, you know, BPA. Try and minimize your exposure to heavy metals, whether it be, you know, mercury, whether it be arsenic, whatever that
Or
might
even
be.
aluminium for cooking. People wrap their
Aluminium.
food in aluminium foil, and
Yeah.
it's just like, why would you do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Rolling, you know, antiperspirants, spraying
Yep.
antiperspirants.
Oh.
There's a lot. So try and minimize. Of course, you have to be realistic. You know, unfortunately, we're now in London. You go outside and you're going to inhale pollutants. It's just something you can't really avoid. But try and, as best as possible, minimize the bad stuff that goes in. You then really have to make sure that your diet is packed with color, because your antioxidants are really your liver's best defense. Because when your liver detoxifies something that's harmful, unfortunately, part of that process creates some rather unstable molecules that need to be neutralized by antioxidants. So making sure that you have color is
And it's the
very
colour of the
important.
rainbow, isn't it?
Colour of the rainbow.
Every meal.
Every meal. So make sure you've got some colour in there. And this is something that we should all be striving for, really, to make sure that there's colour on our plate. And then, yeah, we can then go in with, you know, different strategies. I mean, you mentioned milk thistle, which is a brilliant herb for liver detoxification. We mentioned artichoke already. I would also consider, in some cases anyway, using glutathione, which is your liver's master antioxidant. You can also use something which is generally a lot cheaper, which is NAC, N-acetylcysteine, which makes glutathione.
Now, NAC's been banned in America, hasn't it?
It's unbelievable. You really have to stay, you know, in our industry, you have to stay on top of many of these things, because the regulations change quite frequently as to what you can, you know. I have a lot of international patients, as do many people that have studied at CNM. So it's sort of working, what can we send where? What, even in the UK, what legislation maybe changes at
iodine
times.
you can't buy anymore here.
Yeah.
In a chemist, so that's been banned. I want to talk a little bit more about NAC, because I think it's a very important supplement.
Yeah.
It's something I give my children every Christmas, because I know
love
they're not
that.
going to buy it, so it's just like, here's your NAC for the year.
I mean, it's, you know, NAC is very good for many reasons. It's very good for liver support, for glutathione support. It's very good for breaking down mucus in your airway, so good for your immune system. If you're fighting a cough or congestion, NAC is very good. It's also a very good biofilm disruptor. So I often use it in protocols if people have generally more advanced or more complex kind of dysbiosis. So, you know, for example, I have patients with quite complex SIBO, where there's a lot going on in their small intestine, and you need to sort of break those biofilms down that can form. So NAC is quite a good way of breaking those down and then adding things in that will hopefully remove the unwanted organisms, whether it be, you know, allicin from garlic or berberine. You know, those sorts of things will kill unwanted organisms. But sometimes you need something like NAC or other biofilm disruptors to sort of expose them, if you like.
Okay, that makes sense. We moved on from the gallbladder and we were talking about gallstones, and I just want to come back to it actually. What's a great way of getting rid of gallstones?
There are many ways really that you can do it. The first thing I always would say about anything, but especially here, is find out the why. Why is that happening? We do actually have some protocols that we teach at CNM, which I probably need to be a bit careful giving the advice of on here, but we do have protocols specific, which are kind of gallbladder cleanses, and they're ways of breaking up gallstones, which can be quite effective. Is probably one of the things that I probably need to be a bit careful of on here, just because of the, it needs to be quite carefully supported by a naturopathic practitioner. But there are things that we would use in a particular way to sort of break up those fatty deposits.
I think this is the case with everything really. You do need guidance if you're going to hit it hard because there's a problem. So for me, I detox a little bit every day. I make sure I have some bitter greens. I make sure I have my spirulina, my chlorella in my smoothie, my green smoothie. So that's great. I'm detoxing every day. But when you're going to do a big detox, when you're going to break down the stones, heavy metal detox, I always think should be done under supervision, because we have so many heavy metals floating around in our bodies now, that I think it's really important to be supervised, which is where you guys come in brilliantly. Though, let's move down further. We're nearly at
the
end.
So then we have the large intestine, and the large intestine now is predominantly about sort of getting ready to eliminate anything that's left that we don't want, but it's also where we have most of the microorganisms. We have around 100 trillion microbes that live in the large intestine. So this is the bit that sort of goes around the abdomen. So really, I guess one of the most important takeaway points here is the gut microbiome now. And the gut microbiome is something that, in the last sort of 10 years or so, our understanding of has evolved substantially.
Yep.
Our approaches to treating this and altering this are, now extensive. And the gut microbiome has a lot of different functions to fulfill, whether it be supporting the development of our immune system. This is how our immune system learns. Whether it be producing nutrients like vitamin K, vitamin K2 for us, whether it be, helping us to support our brain health. There's a really, really important connection between the gut microbiome in particular and the brain.
Absolutely. And, the gut is connected to the brain with the vagus nerve. Yeah. And we have seen, I'm just about to go on retreat, actually, but I'm taking my daughters, and I remember the first time that I took them there, and my eldest daughter, ADHD, on Ritalin, couldn't read a book, so she always listened to audiobooks because she just couldn't throw it away. And we went on retreat, and we spent a week. I fasted, but they were doing green smoothies and then a very small raw vegan at the end. And by about the fourth day, she went, "Oh, I fancy reading a book by the pool."
Wow.
And she read this massive book on psychology without all the normal chatter. Was absolutely brilliant. We got to the airport and she went off to the loo, came back, and we had a little picnic that we were given by Amchara, which was kind of organic, raw, vegan. And she came back, and I could just see in her eyes that she'd been eating sugar. And by the time we got off the aeroplane back in London, she was bouncing off the plane. She was just back, couldn't read a book again, and we... I've said many times, any doctor that prescribes a drug for a child without asking them their lifestyle is not a doctor, they're a drug pusher. Yeah. That's simple. So let's, carry on. Sorry, Bobby. I get very, very passionate about the brain and the gut connection.
It's so important because it brings in, a lot of conditions. Mental health obviously is a big one in terms of depression, anxiety, and many other disorders. I work a lot with chronic pain patients with fibromyalgia, for example. And for example, there are certain bacteria that produce these molecules in our gut called short-chain fatty acids. And short-chain fatty acids can modulate your brain's perception of pain, particularly some of them. So if you think about it, pain is perceived all up here in our brain, and it's almost based on sort of a threshold of, does this stimulus need to generate a pain response in our body? And what we've learned in recent research is that by having certain short-chain fatty acids, we're actually influencing and impacting significantly our brain's perception of pain. So it just makes you think, well, therefore, if our gut microbiome is out of balance and we don't have the specific species to make those short-chain fatty acids, that could therefore lower your pain threshold. So there's a big connection there. Again, short-chain fatty acids are very much connected to your emotional health as well and your mood. We have most of our serotonin produced in the gut as well, which is, of course, the chemical that people refer to as being linked to happiness. The vagus nerve you mentioned, which is this sort of super highway of information, literally connects the brain and the gut.
That's what it is.
It's a super highway. And what's interesting about the vagus nerve is that 90% of it is involving the distribution of information from the gut to the brain. Only 10% is from the brain to the gut, which tells you that the brain has a major influence on what's going on up here. So it's very, very important. If ever I'm dealing with anything that's brain related, whether it be a migraine, whether it be depression, whether it be fibromyalgia, whatever it is, ADHD, I'm always thinking, what is going on in this person's gut? How is their gut microbiome working? What's the gut barrier like? Are there permeability issues there?
So we'll come on to that. So that's leaky gut, which
Yes.
most people now, I think, is kind of common knowledge that we have this it's one cell deep, isn't it? The gut lining.
Well, basically, so traditional leaky gut is where we have kind of cells packed together and those cells should be tightly bound. And in leaky gut, those epithelial cells sort of space out and there are little gaps where the contents of the gut can then enter because the other side of that wall is basically blood. So, for example, the stuff that you don't want to be absorbed, like undigested food, like bacteria, like bacterial toxins, they can enter the blood. And of course, what that's doing is it's like having a knife and giving a constant jab to your immune system. And we always say, leaky gut, leaky brain. So that connection again, if you've got sort of permeability issues in the gut, you might be looking at problems with your brain barrier as well.
Yeah, that's why I did my testing, because my brain fog was just appalling.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember anything. And it goes beyond, kind of, where did I put my car keys? Looking at them and kind of going, what are these for? I pulled off, a road home to my mum that I'd done, every week for 40 years. And I had to pull over the car and I'm just going, where am I and what am I doing here? I mean, it's terrifying when that starts happening. And a lot of people will actually think that they're, I thought, oh my God, have I got early dementia?
Yeah.
And you have to check your gut lining.
Yeah.
You have to check your B vitamins. And it's extraordinary how many people I talk to who go, so-and-so's got dementia or Alzheimer's. And I go, have you checked the gut lining? Have you checked the B vitamins? And they're going, there's no need. It's definitely Alzheimer's or dementia. And you're going, but you haven't eliminated the other causes that look exactly the same.
Yeah, completely. Brain fog's a big one, and it comes into so many different conditions, whether it be, whether it be perimenopause, which obviously is just a life stage, or whether it be a condition like fibromyalgia, or whether it be simply manifesting because of nutritional deficiencies or gut permeability issues. There are so many reasons why it can manifest. And this is all where naturopathic medicine has a major role to play, because this is when you have patients coming in who've been telling you that they've been in chronic pain for 25 years with brain fog and have no energy to get out of bed. And then a month later, they tell you that they're able to go to the shop with their grandkids and they're able to get up in the morning almost free of pain. I've seen this countless times simply by asking the right question, which is why. Why do you have these problems? Why is it there? And that's why in naturopathy we have an hour, normally it's an hour for a case history, because in 5-10 minutes, which is what a doctor has, they're always going to be losing, because how can you really understand that person and how they've got to where they are today in such a short amount of time?
The cynic in me believes that, doctors are only given 10 minutes. It's not their choice. They are told by their regulatory body that they have 10 minutes. But the cynic in me goes, they're only given 10 minutes because they have no interest in getting to the root cause. They're just given a drug to prescribe, and you know what the symptom is, and you take a drug and you suppress it. And that's how the system works. Mm-hmm. And that's not how the body works. And that's why we're getting sicker and sicker and sicker as a human race. Yeah. But things are changing. Now, we can't say too much about it at the moment, but CNN and the Wellness Way podcast have got something very exciting in the pipeline. What can we say about it at the moment? Go to our web pages.
Well, I think the main thing to say is that, our mission is ultimately the same, which is to, ensure that people are educated to make informed decisions and be aware of the natural solutions to their health problems. And ultimately, therefore, our mission is to help people and to help people improve their health and to improve their lives. So yes, we're very much aligned in that philosophy.
We are indeed. And CNM has this beautiful space in central London, and we're working on something very, very exciting here. By the time this episode comes out, hopefully we'll be live, but as we record it, we can't say too much about it. But if you head over to my webpage, you will get a little interview with Bobby and I talking about our vision for the future of health. So for now, Bobby, we haven't quite finished. We've still got the anus to go. Is there anything you want to say about the anus?
Well, I didn't think we'd be ending the podcast there, but of course, I suppose that was only natural. Well, the anus is obviously just the end of the large intestine, so there's probably not too much else to say there. But what I guess is a good place to end on would be the fact that, of course, what the anus is there to do is to support with a controlled, of course, elimination. So we can't forget that through this process of digestion and absorption, we then end up with an end product that we need to get rid of. And that end product is made up of a lot of bacteria. In fact, a stool can be made up of about 30-40% bacteria. We're looking there at a stool which contains the byproducts of what the liver's trying to get out of the body, hormones, toxins. There's so much in there, undigested bits of food. Anything else that's there will then get rid of. And the body's trying to get rid of it regularly. So just think about, are you passing bowel motions frequently? Are they sufficient? Because we do need to make sure that we are supporting that elimination pathway, which the digestive system, as one of its key roles. Really, the digestive system, it's all about digestion, absorption, and elimination.
Perfect. That is just everything you need to know. I love talking to you. You are just a mine of information. Very quickly before we go, because I've got to cover this. Things like Crohn's disease, IBS, what are they within the body?
Crohn's disease, IBS is irritable bowel syndrome. In my opinion, it's one of the most frustrating diagnoses ever. It's not really a diagnosis because it is a syndrome, which means that it is a collection of signs and symptoms. And it basically means that you don't fit into a clear category that a medical professional would like to put you in, i.e. you don't have Crohn's, you don't have ulcerative colitis, you don't have celiac, you don't have diverticulitis, you don't tick any of those boxes. So you then get sort of lumped into this IBS category. Then we have what we call inflammatory bowel disease, which really is ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. Those are very much inflammatory diseases. This is actually one of the reasons that I got into the space, because my mum had Crohn's disease. And she, in the end, growing up, had an ileostomy, a bag attached to her abdomen.
Gosh, that bad.
So she had this. This was actually just before I was born. But yeah, she did. And I always wondered, there must have been another way, surely. She went down the very typical routes of steroids, immune suppressants, and then an ileostomy, which is permanent. And yeah, it never sat well with me growing up. I've always been very inquisitive and just thought, well, there must have been an approach that could have been taken to have stopped that. But of course, she was not aware of it and she didn't know. And so, yeah, a big interest of mine in practice is definitely inflammatory bowel disease. And I've seen the most amazing results of people coming in. You know, I've had kids come in, 11-year-olds with Crohn's disease who can barely go to school because of the severity of their symptoms, and they need to be by a toilet, hemorrhaging blood. And, within a few months, they are 80% better, 90% better. So the scope and the power of naturopathy is remarkable. And obviously I live and breathe it. And that's why at the college, I love my role, because it's a much bigger picture of being able to reach more people. A bit like with you on your platform, these platforms are important because we can disseminate this information and this awareness to a lot of people.
And people are becoming more aware. And so I look forward to working with you again in the future soon, and with CNM. You do extraordinary work, Bobby, and I am so grateful for what you do. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Philly.
Before you go, we all know the importance of journaling for mental health, and that's why I've updated my book, The Natural Wellness Journal, to help you navigate the path of self-healing. Available on phillyjlay.com, and if journaling isn't your thing, I've created an interactive ebook, The Wellness Way, Your Natural Health Systems, that will connect you to some of my greatest podcast guests, so you can learn more and take back the power over your health. Thank you.